Yo, there is so much wild and crazy news we have to talk about today. FEMA threats and misinformation, Sabrina Carpenter and Chappell Roan controversies, the controversy around the shaken baby syndrome execution this week, the scandalous TikTok leaks, and huge updates around Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon as the United States is getting even more involved. So hit that like button to support these big daily dives into the news, and let's just jump into it.
This is a news show.
This is insane. FEMA employees are apparently being threatened by an armed militia. And beyond that, they're being threatened by people who have fallen victim to the absolutely insane amount of misinformation we've seen around Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Some of which, of course, we talked about last week, with the likes of Donald Trump being one of the biggest figures sharing these lies. With administration officials saying the misinformation around Helene has been unlike anything we've ever seen before. In fact, analysts at the Nonprofit Institute for Strategic Defense discovered that just 33 posts on X, and understand, there was way more than 33. 33 of those posts containing claims debunked by FEMA, the White House, and the US government had together generated more than 160 million views. One of those false claims that we should talk about has to do with a town in Rutherford County, North Carolina called Chimney Rock. You see, because there was a rumor going around on social media that government officials plan to take over the village and bulldoze bodies under the rubble. And even though the authorities and news outlets quickly debunked that claim, people still took to social media calling for militias to go after FEMA, which unfortunately brings us to this weekend when the agency reportedly advised all federal responders in Rutherford County to stand down and evacuate immediately, with their message saying that National Guard troops had, quote, come across 2 trucks of armed militia saying they were out hunting FEMA. Now, it is reportedly unclear right now how credible the armed militia danger is, but there is no doubt that these federal responders who are trying to help victims of Hurricane Helene are not getting the welcome you would expect, with former FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate saying that individual FEMA personnel have received threats in the past, but on a much smaller scale, and added, in the field, it's rare. This is unprecedented. I know we've had individuals, but not an area or a group that's threatening FEMA. And in fact, this weekend we saw authorities in North Carolina arresting a man and charging him with going armed to the terror of the public. And this after he allegedly made a comment about harming FEMA employees while brandishing a handgun and a rifle. Right? And so with all this, these threats, they can't be taken lightly, and FEMA is having to change the way it operates. For example, the agency is now reportedly operating at set locations and secured areas instead of going door to door like they usually do. And with that, when federal employees have showed up at people's doors with supplies or other offers to help, they've sometimes been greeted with yelling, or people outright saying, we don't want your help here. And in one case, a resident actually showed up at a supplies distribution center and threatened FEMA personnel who were also stationed there. And regarding these types of stories, you had one former official with the Forest Service, which helps FEMA out sometimes, saying, it's terrible because a lot of these folks who need assistance are refusing it because they believe the stuff people are saying about FEMA and the government. And it's sad because they are probably the ones who need the help the most. So understand, this is affecting the help everyone gets, not just them. Or because of the threats this weekend, aid to several communities was temporarily paused. And officials have said previously that debunking all the misinformation has used up resources that could have been used more effectively in the recovery efforts. And then beyond that, one seriously alarming result of all this is that it's reportedly provided an opportunity for white supremacist groups to recruit new members, with the Wall Street Journal reporting on Friday that white nationalist groups had joined recovery efforts in both Florida and in the Carolinas, with one of those groups even saying in a video on X, we in Patriot Front are here to help out the local communities. Our politicians can hem and haw and switch over quickly to their talking points about Israel, but we truly are supporting our communities and being America first. With many noting that this sort of thing is a common tactic. You create a problem and then fix it and claim that you're the only one doing it. But for now, we'll have to continue to wait to see what happens on the ground as well as online with misinformation. And in the meantime, of course, I'd love to know your thoughts on this, especially if you or someone you know has been affected by these storms or any of these crazy encounters. But then let's talk about the pop culture news for the day, starting with people launching a campaign to protect the children from Sabrina Carpenter. And this is clips of her short and sweet tour have gone viral, showing her dancing very provocatively. And personally, I find myself confused. Like, if you've never listened to her recent album, Sabrina sings pretty explicitly about sex on a lot of her songs. And so it shouldn't be shocking that on the tour where she's performing these songs that it gets sexual. And so you have some writing things like, I'm sorry, but am I the only one offended? Like, why is she being disgusting sexually in front of children? Others equating her show to soft porn that's become so popularized to the point it's a public performance children can attend. But to that, I would say, and understand, I am not a Sabrina Carpenter stan. Sabrina Carpenter is a 25-year-old woman. A 25-year-old woman who, as we've discussed, has a song where she sings about sex and she's performing at a concert, which, by the way, it is the Sabrina Carpenter concert, not the Sabrina Carpenter daycare and bakery. She's gonna be singing about some different kinds of cakes, y'all. And if you, as a parent of a young child, are not monitoring what they're listening to or the thing that you're taking them to, that's a you problem. Look into it before you swipe your credit card. As other people have noted, Sabrina Carpenter's brand, it's not a secret, has been about being short, hot, and horny. And this sort of sexuality, visual or lyrical, it's not a new thing. And I get that it's easier to be a reactionary, angry person, but once again, That's a you problem. Then on a different front of pop culture news, we got unexpected celebrity feud news because we got Bill Maher and Chappell Roan, and that's because Bill devoted a nearly 9-minute segment of his show to calling out Chappell Roan for her support of Palestine. And he starts off by explaining who she is to his viewers who might be unfamiliar by saying she's actually a great recording artist who, like a Hezbollah pager, is really blowing up. With him then applauding Chappell for her previous statements on politics where she said she would question both sides and always use critical thinking. But you then had Bill saying that she isn't actually using critical thinking when it comes to Israel and Palestine, accusing her and her generation of getting all their news from TikTok. With him then spending a big chunk of that segment bringing up that Chappell is an out queer woman whose sexuality is a major part of her art and stage presence, and trying to use that to further his arguments. Saying, Chappell, if you think it was repressive growing up queer in the Midwest, try the Mideast. You're a female drag queen and you sing, I fucked you in the bathroom when we went to dinner, your parents at the table. That wouldn't fly in Gaza, although you would straight off a roof. And going on to say, you know when you sing that LA is where boys and girls can all be queens every single day? You're welcome, but offer not good in the West Bank. Chappell, you're not wrong that oppression is bad or that Palestinian and many other Muslim populations are oppressed and deserve to be freed. You just have it completely ass backwards as to who is doing the oppressing. With Bill then accusing her of being pro-Hamas and therefore pro-other forms of terrorism. And the fallout that we've seen from this have varied wildly depending on where you're looking. Right in the comments section of the YouTube video, people think that it was a mic drop moment from Bill, that he nailed it. But then over on Twitter, you had people slamming him both for his rhetoric around Israel and Palestine, as well as his choice to go all in on Chappell Roan, with folks saying things like, who the fuck thinks it's okay for this old ass corrupt evil dipshit to talk about throwing a 26-year-old Chappell Roan off of a roof for being anti-genocide? And others saying this was 9 minutes of misogynistic, lesbophobic drivel because Chappell Roan said we should stop giving Israel money to slaughter Palestinians. As well as the likes of Hassan Piker saying that one day Bill Maher will die alone and sad and not a single person will mourn for him because the remainder of his smug boomer fan base will have also died. And this is you also had outlets like Deadline saying that Bill's comments about Chappell echo a common narrative known as pinkwashing, the practice of propping up Israel's LGBTQ progress to distract from the ongoing violence and repression against Palestinians. But, with this whole Bill Maher, Chappell Roan situation, where do you land on this and why? And then, Robert Robertson is now set to be the first person to ever be sentenced to death in connection to shaken baby syndrome. But this is now serious concerns have been raised about the science behind that diagnosis. So let's break it down, right? More than 20 years ago, Robertson was convicted and sentenced to death in Texas for the killing of his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki. And that after medical professionals found that she had died of shaken baby syndrome, which is a form of child abuse where an infant is seriously injured after being shaken back and forth. Now, according to Robertson, one night in January of 2002, he woke up because of Nikki's cries, with him saying that he found that she had fallen 1 to 2 feet out of the bed that the two were sleeping in. With that, he said he saw blood on her lips and a bruise under her chin, so he wiped up the blood and kept her awake for 2 hours to make sure that she was okay before they eventually fell back asleep. Then, when he got up in the morning, he said that Nikki was unresponsive, so he took her to the hospital where she tragically died. And there, according to court documents, doctors and nurses at the hospital immediately suspected abuse due to the bruises and other injuries, including severe brain swelling and bleeding at the back of her eyes. Conditions that have been used to diagnose shaken baby syndrome, and ones that the medical team didn't believe could have been caused by a short fall, with the autopsy ruling that the death was a homicide from shaking and blows. And Robertson, who was alone with Nikki, got convicted. But Robertson has denied that he abused Nikki, and throughout various appeals, his lawyers have said that there is a different explanation for her death, arguing that the diagnosis didn't take into account Nikki's other very serious medical problem. You see, in the days before her death, Nikki had been struggling with a serious respiratory infection that resulted in visits to the emergency room and a pediatrician's office where her temperature was recorded at 104.5 degrees. So as a result, Nikki got prescribed 2 drugs, including codeine, that are now viewed as inappropriate for children her age. So you had Robertson's attorneys arguing that these drugs could have hindered her breathing and caused hypoxia, which in turn could explain the brain swelling and bleeding. Then presenting both new evidence and expert testimony that suggests that Nikki had died of undiagnosed pneumonia and the prescribed medication that she had taken. But also, you had the lawyers arguing that the science around shaken baby syndrome, it's changed in the 2 decades since Robertson was convicted, because that diagnosis, which is now called abusive head trauma, it's still recognized by plenty of doctors in the American Academy of Pediatrics. But this is other doctors as well as forensic experts and defense lawyers have questioned how reliable it is in criminal convictions, especially ones from decades ago when the science was less understood, with many noting how a scientific review found that studies have failed to produce good evidence that this kind of head trauma is caused by shaking alone. And then beyond that, experts say that internal conditions like brain swelling and bleeding are no longer accepted as proof of abuse alone as they were in Robertson's case, with his lawyers arguing arguing that the medical community now recognizes that those symptoms can potentially be caused by a number of naturally occurring illnesses and accidents. And even doctors who still defend the abusive head trauma diagnosis say that medical history and surrounding circumstances need to be taken into account, which is a key thing here because that was not the case with Nikki. With a pediatrician specializing in child abuse speaking on behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics and telling reporters, some of these presenting signs can and should lead to a diagnosis of something other than abusive head trauma. And in fact, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, right, the state's highest criminal court, actually paused Roberson's execution back in 2016 because of challenges to the scientific consensus around shaken baby diagnoses. And that decision was issued on the basis of a junk science law passed in Texas a few years earlier that allowed the court to overturn convictions when the scientific evidence used to convict someone had changed or been discredited. Well, the court ultimately decided that doubt over the case wasn't enough to reverse it. Other shaken baby convictions have been overturned due to the growing body of evidence that the diagnosis is not always reliable. Literally just this month, the same Texas criminal court overturned a very similar ruling in a non-capital case where a man was convicted of injuring a child by shaking back in 2000. With the judge's ruling that the diagnosis at the heart of that case was scientifically questionable, arguing that the medical understanding had changed and writing. Research ranging from mechanical dolls to animal abuse has yet to bridge the gap between theories. Essentially, science has evolved to a degree that has removed shaken from shaken baby syndrome, and adding that if the current science had been part of that man's trial then, it is more likely than not he would not have been convicted, and explicitly pointing there to the state's junk science law. So with that recent ruling, Roberson's lawyers asked the same court to apply its logic to his case and stop his execution from going forward, arguing that the expert testimony used to convict their client was virtually identical to that of the man whose case the court overturned, with his attorneys also urging the court to reconsider Roberson's earlier appeal based on the junk science law, noting that a majority of the Texas House found that the law isn't being properly implemented by the judiciary system. But despite its ruling about shaken baby syndrome and junk science just days earlier, the court refused Roberson's appeal, which has left him with few options to delay or reverse his execution, which is currently planned for this Thursday. Now with this, part of the reason for that decision could be based on the fact that there was one notable difference between Roberson's case and the one that was overturned, which is that the district attorney's office in the first case has gone back on its expert testimony, and while the DA in Roberson's case has not done the same, there are plenty of people vouching for him, with a very notably including a former assistant police chief who was the lead detective in the case and helped put Roberson behind bars, with him now saying he believes Roberson is innocent and regrets his role in the trial. And this, as numerous groups have also signed letters supporting his clemency, which he has requested from the Texas Board of Pardons and Parole, with that including 34 scientists and doctors, parental rights groups, faith leaders, and attorneys. Hell, we even saw a majority of the Texas House coming together in a rare show of bipartisanship to urge the board to recommend clemency. But as far as what is actually going to happen, the board has until tomorrow to decide whether or not to recommend clemency. And then even if they do, it'll be up to Texas Governor Greg Abbott to decide whether or not to grant it. But there, it's worth noting that Abbott is a famously strong supporter of the death penalty and has only intervened once to stop an execution from being carried out back in 2018. But then, to take a quick break from the news, debt is something that no one likes to think about. But the reality is that many of us are going to find ourselves sinking deeper into it during the holidays. Right? I mean, last year, half of American consumers took on debt just to cover holiday expenses. And this is something that can easily happen to anyone, but here's the good news. It is never too early to start planning a way out. And today's sponsor of our show, PDS Debt, can offer you a personalized solution to help you get back on track. Right? Does this sound familiar, right? You're making monthly payments on your debt, but your balances aren't shrinking. Well, PDS Debt has solutions tailored for you. Right? PDS Debt offers customized solutions for anyone dealing with credit card debt, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. And anyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score needed. Whether your credit is bad or just fair, you're still eligible. You can save more while paying off your debt in a fraction of the time. So start planning today. Get a free debt analysis now at pdsdebt.com/DeFranco. It takes just 30 seconds. That's pdsdebt.com/DeFranco. Because nobody enjoys the stress of mounting debt or the weight of that constant pressure, especially during the holidays. It's time to take back control of your life and live for yourself, not your debt. But then, SpaceX just accomplished something that's truly extraordinary. Because if you're unfamiliar, let me introduce you to Starship. It is the nearly 400-foot tall, largest and most powerful rocket ever built. And SpaceX plans to use it to get humans to the moon and then Mars. And with this, the first 3 test flights ended in some admittedly beautiful explosions, and the 4th returned to Earth without exploding, though it suffered some damage. And so after some upgrading of the software and reworking of the heat shield, the 5th Starship lifted off the launch pad in Boca Chica, Texas at sunrise yesterday.
3, 2, 1.
With it then arcing over the Gulf of Mexico, but about 7 minutes into the flight, it attempted one of the most daring feats SpaceX has ever done. Because for nearly a decade now, the company's smaller Falcon 9 rockets, they've reused their first stage boosters by landing them safely on floating ocean barges or inland concrete slabs. But now SpaceX wants to do the same thing with Starship, except for one difference. Right? They're not gonna land the booster on a barge or a slab, but right back on the launch pad. And to pull it off, SpaceX built this tower, which is taller than the Statue of Liberty, and they equipped it with a pair of enormous metal arms that have been dubbed chopsticks. And so what we saw yesterday is as the Starship's 233-foot stainless steel booster guided itself down toward Earth, it fired its Raptor engines to slow its descent, and then the tower reached out like a mother catching her baby, all to the sound of SpaceX engineers just losing their damn minds. With the booster hooking itself into place via tiny protruding bars under the four forward grid fins and getting lowered safely to the pad. And all of this as the upper half of the rocket, right, the actual spacecraft, continued its journey around the globe, soaring more than 130 miles high, dipping into space, and then landing in the Indian Ocean where it sank as planned. And then you already know that social media is addicting, but have you ever wondered, like, is there a number I could put on it, right? Because for TikTok, we actually have a number thanks to TikTok's own internal research that revealed that you will become addicted on average after just 35 minutes. So at around 260 videos, they got their hooks in you. But that's just one of the many disturbing revelations that came from this cache of documents that's been trickling out over the past week. Though to understand how all of this started, we gotta go back to April of 2022. That's when Forbes published a bombshell report on the alleged sexual exploitation enabled by TikTok, with company officials noting a high number of underage streamers receiving gifts or coins, which convert into real money in exchange for stripping live on camera, with a youth and media expert at Harvard saying at the time,
"It's the digital equivalent of going down the street to a strip club filled with 15-year-olds. Imagine a local joint putting a bunch of minors on a stage before a live adult audience that's actively giving them money to perform whatever G, PG, or PG-13 activities they request. This is sexual exploitation, but that's exactly what TikTok is doing here."
With that report prompting a 2-year investigation, which led to what we saw last Tuesday. 13 states, including New York and California, as well as the District of Columbia, separately suing TikTok, accusing the company of violating consumer protection laws, getting teens addicted to the platform, and harming their mental health. And now a trove of redacted documents from Kentucky's lawsuit that were accidentally left readable. I mean, that's really the only reason we know about this. They've been reviewed by NPR and Kentucky Public Radio. So diving in, we see internal communications between some TikTok staffers who compared the app's algorithm to a slot machine, with a TikTok executive referring to American teens as the golden audience, saying it's better to have young people as an early adopter, and all the while, they knew that their app was detrimental for kids' mental health, with TikTok's own research concluding that compulsive usage correlates with a slew of negative mental health effects like loss of analytical skills, memory formation, contextual thinking, conversational depth, empathy, and increased anxiety. And this is one of their executives allegedly said, the reason kids watch TikTok is because the algorithm is really good. But I think we need to be cognizant of what it might mean for other opportunities. And when I say other opportunities, I literally mean sleep and eating and moving around the room and looking at somebody in the eyes. Now, to be fair, TikTok has implemented a feature that allows parents to set time limits on their kids' usage, with that ranging from 40 minutes to 2 hours per day. But the platform's own tests show that the measure only decreased usage from around 108.5 minutes per day to 107 minutes, which one of the project managers actually touted as a success, but maybe not for the reason you think, or because they admitted that the feature's real goal was improving public trust in the TikTok platform via media coverage. And like a villain laying out their plan because it can't be stopped, flatly adding, our goal is not to reduce the time spent. But that's not to say that TikTok wasn't trying to crack down on things. It's just they were trying to crack down on things like Uggos. Because according to an internal report reviewed by Kentucky's investigators, when TikTok's main video feed saw a quote, high volume of not attractive subjects filling everyone's screens, the app rejiggered its algorithm to amplify users the company viewed as beautiful. Though this is the platform touted its ability to make ugly kids beautiful, or with things like beauty filters, which let users appear thinner and younger or apply virtual makeup. With New York's Attorney General noting that those filters can cause body image issues and encourage eating disorders, body dysmorphia, and more. Now, as far as TikTok's defense, they've accused NPR of cherry-picking misleading quotes and taking outdated documents out of context. But whatever the situation may be in your view of it, these revelations come at a very bad time for TikTok, because its US operations actually set to be outright banned on January 19th unless it severs ties with its Chinese parent company ByteDance, which is something that's unlikely to happen for a number of reasons. So this also is the company might take this law banning it to the Supreme Court before January. But in the meantime, while we wait to see what happens, whether you're one of my fellow social media addicts or not, I'd love to know your thoughts on this situation. But then, the United States is now sending one of its most advanced missile defense systems to Israel, along with about 100 American troops to operate it. This is huge news. One, because it's the first deployment of US forces to Israel since Hamas attacked on October 7th, 2023. But then also two, because while this latest shipment is just adding to the more than 50,000 tons of armaments and military equipment that's been sent to Israel from the US this past year, the deployment of this specific missile system, it may be an indication that Israel's expected upcoming attack on Iran will be, quote, so comprehensive that the Iranians will have to respond. With this update connected to just escalation after escalation that we've seen in the past 2 weeks. Right? Iran launched a major missile attack against Israel on October 1st, with that being in response to the assassination of high-level Iranian, Hamas, and Hezbollah officials, with then Israel vowing its own revenge, and the country's defense minister saying last week, our strike will be powerful, precise, and above all, surprising. They will not understand what happened and how it happened. When it does happen, it also may be surprising for the Biden administration, with officials reportedly frustrated by Israel's reluctance to share its plans, which understand is not a new thing. In fact, American officials have repeatedly been caught off guard by Israel's military actions in Gaza and Lebanon. Though to be clear, right, this new missile system being sent over, it won't actually be used in any upcoming attack, just about defending against whatever comes next. With this specific system designed to shoot down ballistic missiles, it reportedly doesn't have any warheads and it's not used to strike buildings or conduct offensive attacks. So for a lot of people, that is still a problem. With, for example, a former US Army officer who served as an analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency and who resigned in protest of US support for Israel and Gaza, asking, once this battery is in place and Israel enjoys the protection of American air defenders, what incentive does Netanyahu have to keep his word and not strike the sensitive targets he promised to avoid? And this, as others argue, that just by sending this system, it signals that there is approval of Israel's actions. With there being a growing concern, this is potentially encouraging the Israeli government to act more aggressively. And this is a similar debate appears to be happening at the Pentagon around sending more troops. There's a question, if we send more troops, is that helping to prevent a wider war, or is it just emboldening Netanyahu? Right, and actually with that, the US said last month that it would send a few thousand American troops to the region. And a key thing is that is on top of roughly 40,000 military personnel already in the area. And then, even though it's just 100 more troops, the fact that they'll be in Israel makes everything more worrying. Because if American troops get hurt or killed, you have people saying that's most likely to drag the US further into the conflict. With Aaron David Miller, for example, a Middle East expert who advised both Republican and Democratic administrations, saying, if Iranian missiles hit a US soldier or pro-Iranian militias in Iraq or Syria kill or wound US personnel, there's a high probability that the US would take kinetic action against Iran. With these specific troops, you're talking about Israel, where we suspect that Iran is likely to target in the not-so-distant future, so that risk may even be higher. With folks like Harrison Mann, the soldier who resigned over Gaza, for example, saying, even if we make the unreasonably optimistic assumption that this defense system can defeat any and all missiles headed its way, the Israeli military cannot guarantee the safety of these troops from drones which have successfully penetrated Israeli bases in the past. And at that point, this weekend, a Hezbollah strike targeting an army base in northern Israel reportedly killed 4 soldiers and injured 58 others, with that reportedly being from a relatively unsophisticated weapon that didn't get picked up by early warning alarms. Though that said, speaking on a grander scale, Israel has generally been inflicting a lot more damage than it's been taking. I mean, starting with Lebanon today, an Israeli airstrike hit an apartment building in northern Lebanon, reportedly killing at least 21 people. There's also been a lot of conversation about Israel's treatment of UN peacekeepers in the country, people who were there in a mostly observational capacity to monitor and report violations of a UN Security Council resolution which ended the fighting in 2006. And since launching its assault into Lebanon on September 30th, Israel has repeatedly urged the peacekeeping force to withdraw from areas of southern Lebanon, with the peacekeepers refusing. And so what we've seen now is Israel facing international condemnation, including from the US, for actually attacking the peacekeepers. Last Thursday, for example, 2 Indonesian peacekeepers were injured falling from an observation tower at their base after an Israeli tank fired towards it. On Friday, 2 peacekeepers from Sri Lanka were injured in Israeli fire. And yesterday, Israeli tanks forced their way into a peacekeeper base, busting down a gate, with rounds being fired just a couple of hours later, releasing smoke which blew across the base and got at least 15 people sick. However, with this, you have the IDF claiming that it was evacuating soldiers who had been wounded, claiming that the smoke was deployed to aid in that evacuation. But with all this, you have people like UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reminding everyone that any attacks on peacekeepers may constitute a war crime. But there's also, as Israel has raised its concerns that the peacekeeping force is actually an obstacle to its attacks on Hezbollah, with the Israeli military even taking foreign journalists into southern Lebanon yesterday and showing them an alleged Hezbollah tunnel that was within a few hundred feet of a UN peacekeeping position, with Israeli officers claiming that the presence of the tunnels was evidence that Hezbollah had built military infrastructure around UN and civilian settlements in order to use them as cover, as well as then suggesting that the peacekeepers should have actually heard or seen Hezbollah drilling into the mountainside to dig the tunnels. Now, for their part there, a spokesperson for the peacekeepers, they said that they didn't have the equipment to detect underground activity, also saying that they report all tunnels and weapons that they see. But then, moving on to what we're seeing in Gaza, Israeli strikes have killed dozens in just the past couple of days. Yesterday, 5 children were reportedly killed by a drone strike at a refugee camp. And then, Israel attacked a school used to shelter displaced Palestinians, reportedly killing at least 22 people, including 15 children, with the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees saying that this school-turned-shelter was meant to be used to administer polio vaccine. Or because if you hadn't heard, a couple of months ago, polio came back in Gaza after 25 years, and that's not even the half of it. Today, an Israeli airstrike on a hospital tent camp reportedly killed at least 4 people and ignited a fire that injured dozens more, with the Associated Press reporting that it has footage showing children among the wounded. So there you had the Israeli military saying it was actually targeting militants hiding out among civilians, though they didn't provide evidence there. And this is, of course, in recent months, it has repeatedly attacked crowded shelters and tent camps, alleging that Hamas fighters were using them as staging grounds. Also, in addition to these latest strikes, you had a new investigation by the New York Times finding that Israeli forces have regularly forced captured Palestinians to conduct life-threatening reconnaissance missions to avoid putting Israeli soldiers at risk. For example, Palestinian detainees have reportedly been coerced to explore places in Gaza where the Israeli military believes that Hamas militants have prepared an ambush or a booby trap, and this practice has gradually become more widespread since the start of the war last October. But then, to shift it back to the United States, right, all that shit we just talked about is, of course, a massive reason why there's still a lot of angry Palestine supporters here in the US, with us in fact seeing another protest today with people from Jewish Voice for Peace staging a sit-in at the New York Stock Exchange, with the group also writing on X, "As Gaza is bombed, Wall Street booms." The stock prices of weapons manufacturers have skyrocketed this year. The US war economy is profiting from genocide. The 50-plus members of Congress who invest in arms companies get richer every day. The Jewish Voice for Peace also sharing images and clips of protesters being dragged away by police. But for now, that is where we'll leave it. We'll have to wait to see what comes next. And in the meantime, of course, I'd love to know your thoughts. That is the end of today's show. Thank you so much for watching. For more news you need to know, this is what YouTube thinks you're most interested in. This is the most recent video. That is, unless this is currently the most recent video. But either way, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.